Welcome to this keynote session of the AI and Data Exchange. My guests today are Major General Anthony Giantempo, the Program Executive Officer for Cyber and Networks for the Air Force and the Space Force, and Alexis Bonnell, the Chief Information Officer at the Air Force Research Lab. Major General Giantempo and Alexis, thanks so much for taking the time to join me today. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely, glad to be here.
This discussion started, and I will give you all the credit, Major General, after a speech you gave at the Air Force IT Day from our friends at AFCEA. I enjoyed our conversation so much. I said, I want to talk to you. And you said, no, you have to talk to me and Alexis. So this is even better. So I appreciate you both jumping in here. And let's start there. Let's discuss that partnership. Major General, I'll start with you. PEO Cyber Networks, Air Force Research Lab. How did you guys get started talking about AI? Give me just a little bit of background about how this partnership grew.
You betcha. So about maybe a year and a half ago, I was first introduced to Alexis at a conference that I was at with other program executive officers for the other services, military services, as well as other three-letter agencies. And Alexis gave us a presentation on AI. And I'm giving her the credit for sparking the idea in me that I've heard people talking about AI and what they want to do with AI. And quite honestly, it was always we're going to solve world hunger with AI. And if you just gave us X millions of dollars and 3 years, we're going to solve world hunger. Now, I applaud everybody who is aiming that high, but I had some more immediate needs. And it started really with bringing it down, boiling it down to what can I do today with AI that could help me and help my folks with the business of Air Force acquisition. And it really was a grassroots start there. I gathered a bunch of people. We then connected back with Alexis and her team, and we can go through the dynamics of how that's grown, but that's really where the start of it was. And quite honestly, the Kool-Aid that this nice lady makes, I drink by the gallon. And it has really propelled us forward in bringing this incredibly revolutionary tool into our workplace.
And I would just add to that, I think one of the reasons why I have so enjoyed working with General Giantempo and team is, to his point, AI will be able to do a lot of things, make a lot of contributions, but most importantly, there's really a question of how can it make the life of our warfighters a little better every day. And, I think that General Giantempo had such a respect and an empathy for his people, and understanding that there is a lot that's asked of them. There's a lot, that they have to do every day to meet our mission. And so, that willingness to both look at the exotic and the incredible ways that AI was going to contribute, but more importantly, just getting started and letting people kind of find their aha moment and also reduce their pain, with these tools. And I think, one of the things we talk a lot about is how do we give people minutes back on mission? And I think that's soul of the collaboration has just been really key to not being afraid to dig in.
Now, General Giantempo, I've heard Alexis speak several times, and it's people always walk away going, that is a great speech. It's really inspiring. I walk away going, where's my news? And this is why she's on today, because I want some news. So I'm very excited to really get her out of the big broad and down into the weeds a little bit. But I want to go back to something you said just real quick. You mentioned Air Force acquisition, and people look at your title and go, well, he's the PEO for Cyber and Networks. Where does acquisition fit in? Isn't there a PEO for acquisition? Or so walk me through just a little bit of how you're connecting that, hey, I'm Cyber Networks, but there's acquisition piece to it, and,
sure,
and where AI fits in.
So every program executive officer that the Army, the Navy, or the Air Force has is in charge of an acquisition for a portfolio of capabilities. So you will have a program executive officer for naval ships. You will have a program executive officer for mobility aircraft. I am the program executive officer for cyber and network capability for the Air Force. So I am in the business of acquisition, acquiring those capabilities through a very defined process. We have a federal acquisition regulation. We have a defense acquisition regulation. And through those processes, I bring capability to our warfighters within that portfolio and it's usually integrated with and overlapping with the other capabilities that the other program executives are bringing.
Well, and I think too, with this, in a digital age, so much of our advantage is going to be crafted in kind of the IT and digital space, and really making sure that we learn some lessons from the past. I mean, there's no one who knows more about, for example, cloud acquisition, right? Or optimizing that. And I think what's interesting is being able to take that learning by doing that, General Jenna Tempo and team have learned in a lot of other technology spaces, and now look forward and say, okay, well, what is it that we need to know? How do we need to approach, acquiring tools like AI, generative, AI, large language models and other tools. And quite frankly, I think make sure that we make like better and evidence informed decisions, from our learning by doing than maybe we had a little bit longer learning curve on, on the cloud. But now I think one of the beautiful things about our partnership is that we get to learn together, but more importantly, that informs choices of value, requirements, really what all of our options are. And so at the end of the day, in some ways, I think our national security advantage takes the shape through our acquisitions professionals, and really making sure that we're giving them what they need, including the confidence around these tools.
If there's one word that I like to apply to our portfolio, cyber and networks, is scalability. And what I have found being a part of, enterprise information technology is that there are a lot of very smart, innovative people working issues for their mission across the entirety of the Air Force, the Department of Defense, but they're solving those problems at a very, very small scale. They're doing it for their flight, or they're doing it for their squadron or their platoon. And their solutions may work very well for 25 users or 100 users. But then when we want to expand that capability to 700,000 users, there's an entirely different machine that gets put into place to take that same capability and expand it. And sometimes I use the analogy, sometimes senior leaders, CEOs, think that all you have to do is take the really small, good idea and attach a bike pump to it, right? And pump it up to make it a really great, large idea. And a lot of times we have to put that small idea aside, the way that it was architected, and we have to come up with an entirely different way to implement it. That's what our portfolio does for the Air Force, to try to implement these great ideas at a grand scale.
And I think too, just to add on to that, one of the really interesting things about trying to kind of approach AI and a learning by doing mentality, quite frankly, we learned a lot because we got some things wrong, right? To the general's point, we made assumptions, and I can share some of those. One of my assumptions was I'm lucky enough to work with our high performance compute center, and we have just an incredible kind of history and incredible talent around that. And one of the things we assumed was, well, being able to have access to that compute, which is different for AI, right? It's not the CPU kind of normal, processing power that we would have on our desk computers or our laptops. It really is GPU, the big machines that we see from companies like NVIDIA and others. And we assumed, well, we've got some of these big machines in our HPC center, so we're going to be able to run these experiments without a problem. And that was not the right set of assumptions. We found that those computers hadn't been factored to run AI tools. And so, as an example, most technology will run in kind of batches or surges, but with AI, its inference and query goes kind of back and forth really quickly. And so the computers that we had really were not kind of ready or factored for that. And that was a huge assumption that, we got kind of an early insight, really a canary in the coal mine kind of insight on, oh, wow, we're going to have to take a different and more intentional approach. And then I think, what was really complemented by, General Jenna Tempo and his team and their history and success in cloud was helping us understand, well, what does cloud consumption of GPUs look like? And I think one of the things that we found is that a lot of our vendors hadn't actually moved GPU compute over to GovCloud. And so, our partnership really started to highlight, I think, a few things. One, we needed to be able to signal and really look for, that type of GPU power to be available. But two, more importantly, it's been a very interesting experiment on the interweaving of the value, meaning being able to, go to cloud solutions when we have surges, and to General Jenna Tempo's point, on scale. But then also, for example, maybe when folks are sleeping at night and we have many less users on the network, we don't necessarily have to be paying, exquisite, exorbitant costs for GPUs, and we maybe then can switch it to on-prem. So I think it may not seem sexy, but that ability to kind of pioneer together, these hybrid infrastructures that allow us to not only use the tools, but actually like switch between value and make sure we're getting the most return on taxpayer dollars while we advance this technology, I think is something I didn't expect to have to learn, but it's been a really important part of our journey.
Yeah, we're learning as much about the business model of acquiring this capability as we are about using the capability right now. And that's a lot where my team of contract experts, finance experts, business experts are coming into play, trying to work with our industry partners on how do we go about purchasing the capability that they have to offer as we're learning what our needs and requirements are.
And I think that's one of the things that hasn't gotten as much attention. So obviously folks have looked at the human machine teaming and some of the research, platforms we put out on AI that, folks have been using. But I also, think, to the general's point, we have an entire different team that looks at commercial products, right? And really says, well, what are the features? What are the cost models? What are the value? And, to the general's point, being able to say, I think what we're finding out about this technology is, unlike a lot of other technologies where we might put out a system and you train people to navigate it, and you're really asking the person to adapt to the technology. This is a technology that has a level of intimacy, right? That can adapt to that it will adapt to the person. And I think that's really important as leaders for us to say, this will not be a technology that is one ring to rule them all, right? And so being able to understand what is commercially available, how might we graduate different folks to different tools, and really AFRL, we're not in the business of scaling those things, right, or creating the enterprise. And so being able to take that knowledge, what we're learning, and then work, with the PEO like General Jenna Tempos to say, hey, here's what we're finding. We hope this allows you to ride the best thing, right, for the right information set, the right user. And it's going to be more than one thing. And so we continue to be kind of on that journey.
I want to talk about the journey and all the ways you guys are working together, but let me just take a half a step back. And General Jenna Tempo, you mentioned we're learning about the business model of acquiring and using, and to Alexis's point of, hey, this is a hybrid infrastructure. During the day, we have more users. At night, we have fewer users. We can kind of switch between on-prem and in the cloud. What have you learned about the business model? What has stood out to you? What's the one or two lessons you'd say, hey, for other feds who are watching today, here's something to consider, that we stepped in this pothole, don't you step in it, or hey, here's something we saw as an obstacle that we overcame?
Sure. I think the Air Force right now is right on the precipice of trying to decide the best model of either an enterprise centralized solution set or a, no kidding, each individual user comes and pays to play type of user set, or is there a baseline of centralized capability and then each of our users will come in and be able to either add on to that, to surge when they need to. And I think that's the biggest thing, that talking with our industry partners right now, we're trying to get an understanding of how much is going to be centralized from a military service perspective versus each of the components in the military service with different needs, adding on what they need to add on. So that to me is the biggest aspect. I know that the Department of Defense is very much looking to leverage the buying power of the entire Department of Defense in the information technology field, right? So it's, how does someone from the Air Force come to one of our vendors and be able to couple with a Navy effort coming to the same vendor to help drive those costs down for everyone rather than just the Air Force gets to make a deal, the Navy gets to make a deal, and there really isn't a joint overlap there. So I think that's what I'm spending a lot of time on with my fellow PEOs. I actually have a meeting next week out in Washington, D.C. We meet like 4 times a year, and that's absolutely a topic that has been on our mind over the past year, year and a half, on how do we better organize ourselves to bring our requirements together from a Department of Defense perspective. And then all of our other 3-letter agencies like DHA, Department of Logistics, all of them are benefiting from what each of us is doing and pushing forward. So the Army has some very interesting AI initiatives right now, as does the Air Force with Alexis and I. The Navy is looking at us going, we want whatever you guys are doing. We don't need to travel down a third road and reinvent what the Army and the Air Force is doing, right? So there is that collaboration there that we're seeing. And I think over the course of the next year, you're going to see that being brought to a new level.
Yeah, and I mean, I think too, to the point about bringing people together and that cadence of being able to socialize what we're learning, a lot of your conversations, I think, have not only informed, different PEOs and different groups, but also really, provided a platform to talk about, how we de-risk these things. Are they, and really change the tone and the narrative around these where they had been before. So what I love now is that, the conversation maybe a year or two ago was a little bit of like, should we, is this good? How do we do this well? And I think now it's more of a, we're going to do this, we can do this, and how do we put that on kind of jet fuel to the process. Yeah. I would also add though that there are some things that you pointed out to me that I think are interesting, if I can be so bold. I think one is really just telling people to use it, right? Yeah. I mean, I can't tell you how much a difference it is when you have a leader that says like, you're enough. Like, I trust you, you're moral enough, right? You're smart enough. You can use these tools, and just to see, people really blossom and come back to you. I mean, I think they constantly come back to you and tell you stories about how different things save time. Maybe you want to tell some of those. I would say the other thing that, we've been discussing a lot, to your point, is because different people have different missions and different focus areas. We're seeing a lot of elements like role-based AI come. So your team, is doing a lot in the sense of looking at acquisition, kind of AI, or, other elements that really meet those individual users to the theme of their work. And I think we're going to continue to see a lot of those role-based tools really blossom and explode in the next year.
Yeah, the biggest thing about getting our folks to work, and I don't want Alexis to sell herself short, it's one thing to tell a workforce, hey, we've all heard these advertisements for AI models and the things that you can do with them. Go home and experiment with them and use them and play with them. The majority of our workforce doesn't do that, right? I have a couple of folks who like to put their hoodie on at night, at midnight, and from midnight to 4 a.m., they're experimenting with the latest and greatest out there. But the majority of my government workforce, their time on a computer is the time that they have at the office. And of a year ago, there was no access from our government networks to any of these language models, which is where Alexis and the AFRL team came in with Nipper GPT. And that was a huge step where I can give my workforce as a leader time during their workday to say, I would like you to start utilizing this tool. In fact, one of the things we did we changed the image on everybody's startup, that the moment they open up their browser of choice, the first tab that opens up is Nipper GPT. And it is a mainstay on their workspace for the entire day. And we're constantly encouraging, think about the task you're doing and think about whether or not this tool can help you with it. And that really was the grassroots beginning of it. And now as more people are becoming familiar with it, and as it spreads and they get comfortable with it, that's when they start diving down deeper into the capability they can really get after. So right now, I'd say we're just past the superficial point, but we're really not even touching the depths that I think this tool will be capable of helping us with.
Well, and I think one of the things with that is, this is going to sound like a very strange way to, to talk about something that you're trying to contribute, but it's really important actually that we take people on this journey from maybe being anxious about a tool or technology to being bored. So it is an incredible moment of success, for us when someone comes and says, but it doesn't do this and it doesn't do that. Because think about that, Jason, when someone has adopted something and they're actually ready for some of these incredible commercial tools, right, that are coming online that have many more features and richness and much more, kind of contribution to our mission than, kind of our research platform does. What that really means is, if you think about it in a national security context, our goal is really to ask and answer what if, right, faster than the adversary. And so by having people who are willing to lean in and say, okay, what about this technology? Okay, I get it. I'm using it. I know its place in my life. And now I'm ready for the bigger, badder kind of commercial things. What that means is that we are now adopting, the type of change and advantage at a human level that will really differentiate us for the adversary. So, again, it sounds strange, but I actually get really excited when I brief a leader or when I brief, or do a class, and people say, but we want it to do this or that, because guess what? Those tools are out there. And just the psychological move of people to be ready for those, to be hungry for those, I think in our kind of exponential information age, we have to have people exercise that curiosity, right? And exercise that demand for the next technology, because quite frankly, we can have the best technology on earth, but if no one is using it, if no one's asking for it, if no one's graduating onto that next step, then it's not having any impact. And so I think we get really excited and often forget in technology that digital transformation is human transformation. And I think this partnership has been a lot about, finding the people value in these tools.
General Giantempo, I'm glad you brought up Nipper GPT. I was actually going to bring that up as an example, going back to your previous one, where I was talking with someone from DISA, and they gave me this great example of, we were going to build our own until we saw what the Air Force did, and we said, we don't need to build our own. We're just going to use theirs. And I was like, yay, right? Like, that's exactly what we want people to do in government and outside of government, in our own personal lives, our own personal workplaces, not reinvent the wheel over and over again and spend all kinds of money. So let's jump into some of those tools you guys have put together. You I think laid a really great foundation of the partnership and how you're thinking. But I want to dig deeper. What are some of those tools to reduce acquisition timelines and burdens? And of course, the most important one, maybe, or one of the most important ones, the authority to operate. How are you reducing that time as well?
Nipper GPT, just as the large language model, was the first introduction. We then, as I expressed to Alexis and the rest of her team, what I individually was trying to get after. And what I mean by individually is, we went through the explanation of what all of the program executive officers do. They each have different capabilities and different systems that they work on, but all of them are in the business of acquisition. And none of them, I found, really had the bandwidth to go after, how do we do our business better to bring this grand array of capabilities out to different warfighters. So I stood us up to take that lead for Air Force acquisition. And one of the things we did with Alexis was bring on an industry partner to help us with the contracting timeline. There were a number of places that we could have applied where we wanted to go after, finance, logistics, supply chain, you name it. I had to pick someplace. And I think that the biggest return on investment for Department of Defense acquisition of capabilities is applying this tool to our contracting timelines. And if I can burn that down, and by burn that down, a contracting timeline could exist anywhere from 8 months out to 18 months. And to give you an example, I had one of my teams came in and said, from our market research to our contract award, they laid out a plan for me that was 14 months long. Now, they had every single day accounted for every single part of the process, for every number of organizations that is involved in that process. And it came out to 14 months. And I looked at them all and I said, no. And they all got very, very long faces on. And they said, well, what do you mean no? I said, how about 14 days? And, then there was a whole bunch of, your best Scotty impersonations from Star Trek. You asked the impossible. Well, that's what I want to do. I want to start off with asking what they think is impossible. But what I think is the moment they apply even the most superficial capability of what Nipper GPT and our acquisition-oriented modules that we've attached to it can do, they're going to go from 14 months to maybe down to 8 or down to 6. And they're going to do that all on their own without me even prodding or poking or having to raise my voice. And when they come in and they say, we got it down to 6 months, I will pat them on the back and we will celebrate with cake, and we will really celebrate that achievement. And then the next acquisition that they come in and they give me a timeline of 6 months, I'm going to go, how about 14 days? Right? I'm going to keep pressing that technology onto them so they can truly grasp what I believe and what Alexis believes is the never-ending capability. We are just scratching that surface. So the tool sets that we have right now, we're running parallel processes of our acquisition timeline with the help of AI, and then without, our normal process. The thing I want to emphasize, though, is in the end, the process has all of the same guidelines and guards and checks. I am still the human at the end of the process that has the signature responsibility, right? We are not handing over responsibility to AI. We're using it as a tool. And the analogy that I like to give is when our finance teams went from ledgers to spreadsheets, no one really had an issue with them doing that. It was just a tool to make them more proficient. And that's exactly how we're using AI in the acquisition workspace.
And I think we're seeing, to the general's point, we're seeing as people become comfortable, really strong appetite for specialty tools. And so as an example, there's a tool right now that we're kind of experimenting with called ActBot, which is completely really, what I like about it too is it's a what we usually call like a co-collaboration model. So instead of just putting something out there and here it is and take it as you get it, it actually is a platform where we can say, well, grants are slightly different. And so this group can update and optimize some of those elements. This group needs to have a different type of more powerful kind of visual, and actually funding and coming together and co-designing something so that it is more useful from the beginning. So I think, ActBot is one great example. There's another one that I was really impressed by. I think we call it MACE, MASC. But this was specifically around being able to optimize the process of foreign disclosure information, to our allies. And if anyone has ever been through that process, it is incredibly complex. It is incredibly hard, but it's also critical, to get right and to make sure that we have the types of relationships with our allies and the equipment and materials that we share. And, just seeing that type of tool be developed and see where it's saving kind of the process time, making sure we're still respecting kind of classification levels and things like that is really encouraging. I would say one that I haven't seen yet as far as being 100% sold on, but I have the highest hopes for is the ATO RMF process, right? So I would love, if you're out there and you think you have solved, AI for the RMF process, like we are, can't wait to hear more, because, the ATO process is really, one of the last steps to get this innovation used, to get it on track. And, as an authorizing official, it's understandable that as new technologies come out, for just 1 second, we can have a little bit of like hug your AO, right? Because it is not an easy job, especially because you're really expected to almost be an expert in everything, right? And every technology and cyber. And so I think what has been really important and interesting for us, in a lot of the co-learning we're doing and with other amazing AOs like Brian Kropa and others, is really figuring out, well, what is actually different or unique about the AI, right? Because I think a lot of people assume that it's incredibly different to secure, incredibly different to use. And actually what we find is a lot of the privacy law, right? A lot of the cybersecurity issues and elements are actually quite similar. And so then we try to be very thoughtful of just what are, for example, the small adjustments. And I think one of the benefits in learning by doing that we haven't talked about yet, and I don't think gets talked about enough in our story, is the tool we created was open source. So this isn't actually a GOTS tool. This is taking open source technology, and a lot of our hypothesis from a value perspective was, is open source an appropriate, safe, way to do this? And so in being able to do this exercise, not only and put these types of tools out, not only were we able to confirm, like, yes, actually government can get a lot of value from open source, but more importantly, we got to go through the process of ATOing it. And then more importantly, partnering, with some of our cyber experts on General Jenna Tempo's team and Cybercom and DISA and others, security. Security, and really look at the security, which is everyone's kind of gut action, is they want to make sure this is secure. And so being able to have something where you can see everything, right? The research platform, we can kind of see what users are doing. So we can, really be able to tell leaders, I can go to General Jenna Temple and be like, no one's doing anything naughty, right? They're trying to get through their day. But I can also do important steps like, cyber blue books or red teaming, and really pressure test whether these technologies and whether AI can hold up to the types of security that are critical. And I think it's exciting, every now and then we'll do something and say, okay, well, this could be better. But the learning by doing is really what also then allows us to go to some of the small companies, and even the big, the big AI providers and say, hey, we want you to keep a lookout for this, right? Or we want you to turn off this element, or we feel that this is a vulnerability, and being able to get ahead of that so that, not only our smaller business partners, but more importantly, some of the big, large commercial vendors are actually learning alongside with us and able to take value to bring us better tools, that this guy will likely then acquire.
Yeah, everybody is floating on a raft in the ocean of AI innovation and the expectation of how to grasp a hold of that. And they're slowly adding pieces to their rafts to build a larger boat, but it's a really, really big ocean. And what I think Alexis and I are trying to do for the Air Force, and now for our other services that it's working out, is we're not trying to put a corral around what we're doing. What we are saying is, we're the lighthouse that you could look towards as you're starting off on this adventure, see what we have, but also bring what you've thought of and add it to this knowledge. And I and she want to be the ones to disseminate it, right? To disperse it, because I know for a fact all of my fellow PEOs do not have the time or the opportunity to become, one, AI experts, and two, to share it with everybody else. They're kind of busy doing their jobs, right? So that's where I felt that our portfolio for the Air Force needed to be that nexus, and the pipeline that we've built with AFRL is really providing that great foundation that people are starting to pop up and ask and look in our direction, and we're just throwing an arm around them and saying, come on in. We had not thought of that, or guess what? We have, and we're about to save you 6 months of what you thought you needed to do on your own, but we've already done for you.
Well, I think in addition to that, one of the critical elements where that really comes to life is actually compute, right? So we'll see some really amazing technologies, and a lot of them are kind of in the process of being authorized or have been authorized, but they don't necessarily actually, have a connection to the Gov Cloud compute they need. And so I think a lot of what we're trying to solve for in the near term is, how do you bring the best of those tools, but not have to make them, refigure out the same compute problems, and journey that we had, or, how do you make the ATO a little bit easier, because, something might be on an infrastructure or a development kind of gateway that takes a lot of the security controls and compliance, as part of it, to really just fast track things.
Alexis, General Giantempo, let's take a quick break. We're going to hear from an industry perspective next, and then we'll come back and we'll continue our conversation. My guests are Major General Anthony Giantempo, the Program Executive Officer for Cyber and Networks at the Air Force and Space Force, and Alexis Bonnell, the Chief Information Officer at the Air Force Research Lab. I'm Jason Miller, and you're watching the AI and Data Exchange on Federal News Network.